Hello, everyone. This is Ian and my team. Today, we're gonna give our presentation with the topic of ETF fund family clustering. Here's our content. First, I will introduce our background. So, since 2019, the CLO market has many divergent outcomes. Some traditionally top-tier deals materially underperformed, while some smaller managers and less sponsored platforms exceeded expectations. Many investors are actively retiring the owners of CLO managers. The CLO managers made their own adjustment on investment strategies. Morgan Stanley did effective research on the manager styles and how do these investment styles perform. We'll follow Morgan Stanley's methodology to analyze the manager style. From our research, more CLO manager style and corresponding performance will be suggested to facilitate investment. Our objectives are first to assist investors make investment decisions on ETFs. Second, it facilitates the selection of suitable portfolio managers. Third, to encourage managers to invest in continuous learning. And fourth, inspired by CLO manager clustering, combined with the situation, do the research on the ETF's fund family clustering. So the proposals are to conduct CLO clustering, to classify the manager styles and how do these investment styles perform, and research on the investment styles or strategy adjustments that perform well under COVID-19, and data visualization of the manager styles and the performance of these styles. Next, let me hand off to Ke-Shing.
We found our data from Kaggle. It is the US fund data set from Yahoo Finance. And the data contains 1,680 ETFs and over 100 variables. So we can categorize these variables in 4 groups. The first group is general aspects, where it contains total net assets, management company, and size. The second group is portfolio indication, where it contains cash, stocks, bonds, and sectors. The third group is returns, and the fourth group is financial ratios. It contains price and earning ratio, Sharpe ratios, alpha, and beta. Now I'd like to share with you the graphs we made using our original data. The first graph shows the number of fund inception from 1993 to 2018. So we can see the number of fund inception increases in years that the economy was good. The second graph shows that most of the funds are large size. The large size funds are almost 5 times more than the small size funds. And there are 3 investment types of funds: blend, growth, and value. Most of the funds have blend or value investment type. The first graph shows the distribution of them. The graph on the right, we can see that all 3 investment types contain over 90% of stocks. The growth type contains more bonds comparing to the other 2. So the graph on the left shows the Sharpe ratio 5 years from 1993 to 2015. Sharpe ratio helps investors understand the return of an investment compared to its risk. So a high Sharpe ratio is considered good because it suggests that the investment is offering excess return relative to its volatility. So in this graph, the darker the blue is, the higher the Sharpe ratio is. The second graph shows the fund mean annual return 5 years. And the last graph shows fund alpha and beta 5 years. Alpha shows how well or badly a stock has performed in comparison to a benchmark index. And beta indicates how volatile a stock's price has been in comparison to the market. So a high alpha is always good. A high beta may be preferred by investors in growth stocks, but not favored by investors who seek steady return and lower risk. So from this graph, we can see that the beta is steady over the years. However, average alphas are negative in most years, except in 1999 and 2019. So next, Cynthia will talk about methodology.
Thank you, Cushing. So for our methodology part, first I will introduce the variables we used. So there are 7 key variables, which are like excess return, volatilities, and also the annual return, risk, Sharpe ratio, and sum of columns, as well as benchmarked. So sum of columns is actually the sum of the credit rating from credit US government to credit AAA to credit until credit below B. So for the benchmark, it is decided by whether the ETF is an index ETF. So an index ETF is designed specifically for replicating a benchmark index such as S&P 500. And for the first method we use is spectral clustering. So what is spectral clustering? It actually is a technique with roots in graph theory. So the approach is used to identify the communities of nodes in a graph based on the edges connecting them. So actually, spectral clustering seeks to make the groups be classified to have a similar pattern like these two graphs show. Since spectral works best in low dimensions, and we want to observe the shape of clusters in 2D and 3D space, the number of components for PCA here we used are 2 or 3. The trial one we use define the number of components for PCA is 3. And also for here, we use the bond ETF, which contains 24 fund families. So the first number of cluster we used is 24. And then by the elbow method, we decide to try to use 4 clusters. And then here's the trial 2. The number of components for PCA is 2. And we can see that so from the 25 to 4 clusters, there are clear clusters, but it's not so obvious for a similar shape. And now that you have heard about the spectral cluster, I'd like to hand it over to Laurent to discuss the K-means and PCA.
Thank you, Cynthia. Okay, so as a clustering algorithm, K-means takes data points as inputs and groups them into K-clusters. This process of grouping is the training phase of the learning algorithm. The result would be a model that takes the data sample as input and returns the cluster that the new data point belongs to, according to the training that the model went through. When looking at the cumulative explained variance ratio, we cut the number of clusters from 13 to 8. Elbow method consists of plotting the explained variation as a function of the number of clusters and picking the elbow of the curve as the number of clusters to use. After applying the elbow method, we decided that the optimal K we take is 4. Next, please. So to visualize our 4 clusters, we can see that the most of the clusters have showed a strong difference. And next, I would hand it over to Ray.
Thank you. After we tried both K-means and spectral clustering, we tried to group fund family by hierarchical clustering. As you can see from the slide, when the distance is set at 20, the result from K-means leads to 2 fund family groups, whereas spectral clustering leads to 3 fund family groups.
All right, this part is a data visualization of our stock ETF tier level clustering results, and there are 3 tableau charts that will describe the characteristics of the 4 clusters and fund family, such as alpha, mean, annual return, and volatility, which are represented by beta and standard deviation. The first plot is a heat map that lists the breakouts and the characteristics of different clusters, showing the average value for key features of each cluster and sample, with differentiating metrics highlighted. The second chart shows the number of fund family across the 4 stock clusters, and the third one plots the 4 distinct clusters along alpha and beta after grouping the data dimensions using k-means clustering. Next part, Wenyu will talk about details.
So now I would like to share our results for the stock ETFs clustering. So here is the radar chart for stock ETF clustering to show key metrics across clusters. The data is scaled by min-max scalar. So in the radar chart, 100 means the highest and 0 means the lowest among all the clusters. So for deal cluster 1, the ETFs here are more conservative. Most dimensions of this cluster are relatively low and significantly lower than the average. So the chance of generating high returns is small. For deal cluster 2, this set has the highest mean annual return, alpha, Sharpe ratio over the last 5 years. The beta is very close to 1, so we can tell that this ETF carries almost the same systematic risk as the market. The standard deviation of Sharpe ratio are coincident with the high mean annual return shown. So in conclusion, ETFs here generates high return by having high alpha, high volatility, and relatively low risk. From the analysis before, we can see that this cluster has lower population than the others. Deal cluster 3, the beta here is 2, which is the highest and is over twice of the average, which means the fund in this cluster has more systematic risk compared to the market. ETFs here take more risks, which should be generating a high return. However, the mean annual return is negative, which shows that this set of ETFs do not get the high return because the higher risk taken, and the alpha is the smallest among all the clusters. For deal cluster 4, ETFs here have similar beta standard deviation compared to the ETFs in cluster 2. At the meantime, the annual return is relatively low. The alpha is negative, and the Sharpe ratio is slightly lower than the average. It seems like that the fund manager of cluster 2 does a better job in stock selection and time selection than cluster 4. So here is the fund family level collecting results for the stock ETFs. So the first fund family cluster is primarily mapped to ETF cluster 1. This group consists of fund families that are more conservative. Most dimensions are lower than the average. For fund family cluster 2 is largely exposed to deal cluster 2. The group has the highest alpha, Sharpe ratio, mean annual return, and carries almost the same systematic risk as the market. So the fund families in these groups are good enough to outperform the market. The last cluster, fund family cluster 3, has their ETFs concentrate around ETF cluster 4, and some are also concentrating around the deal cluster 2. But the features of the cluster is high concentrated in deal cluster 4. So in conclusion, most of the fund families from this cluster tracks the overall sample mean annual return, while some of them generate higher annual return than others. Next, Cynthia will give a conclusion.
Thank you, Wenyu. So for our project, we find that the k-means clustering method used by Morgan Stanley to study the manager style of CL investment also works here for ETF clustering. We have clear clusters. And second, we also tried the spectral clustering. It also helped develop more precise groups in manager style. And the third, we can find that the clusters of stock ETF mainly differs in alpha, beta, and standard deviation, which stands for excess return, volatility, and risk. For the future study, we have 4 suggestions. The first one is that we can try to use the mixed data set. Because in this project, we tried the bond ETF and stock ETF separately. So this is a good approach to further study this data set. And the second is to try to particularly study on the index ETF to research whether the investment strategy and performance comparison between the different clusters and explore the relationship between the closeness to the index and the return. The third, we can try to apply the methodology to broader financial products such as stock, bond, and so on. And the fourth, we can try to research on how had portfolio management style shift over time and which style perform better in particular periods like during COVID-19 pandemic. And that concludes our presentation. And thank you so much for your time. Please feel free to contact us if you have any questions.